Millionaire realized the maid had visited his father's grave every year, but the reason left him speechless. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The wind drifted softly across Greenwood Cemetery that early November morning, carrying the faint scent of pine and the quiet hum of distant traffic. Alexander Hayes stood beneath the tall oak tree that shaded his father's grave, the same place he visited once a year, never more, never less. To him, grief was something contained, something managed, something that stayed in the past exactly where he'd locked it. But that morning, everything felt off. Someone had been here. Someone who wasn't him. Fresh flowers rested at the base of the headstone, a small bouquet of dandelions tucked neatly behind the roses he brought. Dandelions. His father's favorite, though almost no one knew that. Not the press, not the board members, not the investors who adored the Hayes legacy. Only Alexander, and maybe 2 or 3 people from long ago. He crouched down, fingertips brushing the petals, noticing the way the stems were trimmed with care. The soil had been gently cleared, the marble wiped clean. It was the kind of care someone gave when they weren't obligated, when the act came from something tender, quiet, deeply personal. His brows pulled together as he rose to his feet. Who would come out here every year? He checked his watch, planning to leave, when movement in the distance caught his eye. A woman approached, her steps careful, almost reverent. She wore a simple gray coat, her dark blonde hair pulled into a low bun, her hands clutching a small cloth as if she had done this 1,000 times. And Alexander froze. Claire Dawson. The maid who worked at Hayes Estate. The woman he barely spoke to. The one who blended so seamlessly into the background he sometimes forgot she existed. She didn't see him at first, her attention was locked on the gravestone. She sank to her knees and, with gentle hands, wiped the marble again, as if yesterday's cleaning wasn't enough. As if this was her ritual. As if this grave belonged to someone she'd loved. Alexander's heartbeat tightened in his chest. He stepped forward, gravel crunching under his shoes. Claire startled, her head snapping up, her breath catching like she'd been discovered doing something forbidden. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rustling leaves overhead. Finally, Alexander managed, his voice low, uncertain, "Claire, why are you here?" Her eyes widened, not in guilt but in something far more complicated, something like fear, or longing, or the weight of secrets carried too long. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him, as if the truth, whatever it was, had been waiting for this exact moment to surface. Claire's breath trembled as she stood beneath the towering oak, her fingers still curled around the soft cloth she had used to clean the gravestone. Alexander had never seen her look like this. At the estate she moved quietly, almost invisibly, each task performed with precise care, never drawing attention. But here, in this quiet corner of the cemetery, she looked exposed, as if she had been caught holding a memory that did not belong to her. He waited for her to speak, but she only lowered her gaze, her lashes trembling. The silence stretched thin between them until Alexander finally exhaled, steadying his voice. "You have been coming here every year," he said. "I can see it. The flowers, the way the stone is cleaned. You have been doing this longer than I have." Claire pressed the cloth against her palm as if grounding herself. "I did not mean to intrude," she whispered. "Your father, he was important to me." Alexander's chest tightened at the unexpected softness in her tone. Important. It was a word he had not associated with his father for a long time. His memories were fractured pieces of schedules, business trips, and quick goodbyes in the hallway. The kind of childhood that taught him to stand still and grow distant. How did you know him? He asked. Claire hesitated, then looked at the grave as though speaking to it instead of to him. A long time ago, before the estate, before I had anything stable. I was a child who did not know where to go. Your father helped me. Her voice remained calm, but he heard the strain underneath, like a thread pulled too tight. Alexander stepped closer, curiosity growing heavier than the cold morning air. Helped you? Claire, what does that mean? She swallowed. He gave me food when I had none. He gave me books. He made sure I could stay in school. He never asked for anything back. A soft breeze swept between them, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Alexander felt something shift inside him, a small quake unsettling the foundation of what he believed he knew. His father had never spoken of helping anyone, let alone a child. Why did he not tell us? Claire offered a faint, sad smile. Because it was not about being seen. It was who he was when no one watched. He looked at the grave, suddenly noticing how the dandelions she placed looked brighter than the roses he brought. Hers carried intention. Memory. Love. But why keep coming after he passed? He asked quietly. Claire's fingers tightened around the cloth. Because he was the only person who made me feel safe. The only adult who ever looked at me like I mattered. I did not get to say goodbye when he died. This is my way of staying connected. A softness crept into her voice that made Alexander's chest ache. He realized she was not explaining this for forgiveness. She was explaining it because it was the truth she had carried alone for years. He watched her stand slowly, brushing the dirt from her knees. For the first time since he arrived, she looked directly at him, not as her employer, but as the son of the man she had quietly honored for more than a decade. If you want me to stop coming, she whispered, I will. Alexander felt the answer rise instantly, surprising even himself. No, he said, his voice low and certain. I do not want you to stop. And in that fragile moment, with the rustling leaves above them and the quiet earth beneath their feet, he realized he had just stepped into a part of his father's life he had never known, a part Claire had been protecting long before he ever noticed her existence. The walk back to the estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty. Alexander kept a respectful distance behind Claire as they followed the narrow gravel path toward the parking area, the late morning sun filtering through the branches overhead. He watched the way she moved, steady and grounded, as if she had learned long ago not to take up too much space. When they reached his car, she paused, unsure if she should get in. He opened the passenger door gently, a silent invitation. She hesitated only a heartbeat before accepting. The drive through the winding road felt heavier than the air outside. Alexander found himself glancing at her, noticing things he had never noticed inside the estate, the way she held her hands tightly in her lap when she was nervous, the faint freckles across her nose, the way she focused on the passing trees as if they were easier to face than him. How old were you, he finally asked, when my father helped you? Claire's voice remained soft. About 9. He tried to imagine her then, small and frightened, and the image struck something tender inside him. His father had never been an easy man to understand, but the thought of him kneeling to tie a little girl's worn shoes or handing her a brown paper bag with food inside made Alexander's throat tighten. He never told us, he murmured. Claire nodded. I do not think he wanted anyone to feel obligated, including you. He helped because it was the right thing to do. Alexander kept his eyes on the road, but her words lingered, warming a part of him he had long ignored. When they reached Hayes Estate, the house rose tall and dignified against the bright sky, its stone walls and wide windows catching the sunlight. Claire stepped out quickly, instinctively returning to the role she had always kept, quiet, efficient, almost invisible. But Alexander was not ready to let her disappear behind that role again. Claire, he called. She turned, her expression cautious. I want to understand more, he said. If you are willing. Her eyes softened with something he could not name. Only if you truly want to know. I do. His voice was steady. Sure. She studied him, as if trying to decide whether this version of him was real. After a moment, she nodded and followed him inside. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, familiar scents that suddenly felt different with the weight of what he now knew. Claire paused at the bottom of the staircase, glancing toward the back hallway where the staff rooms were. I should get back to work, she said. Mrs. Porter asked me to finish the linen inventory today. Alexander shook his head gently. It can wait. She hesitated. I do not want anyone to think I am neglecting my duties. You are not, he said. His tone was calm, not commanding, simply certain. He guided her toward the small study off the main hall, the one filled with his father's old leather-bound volumes and maps from his travels. The room smelled like cedar and paper, a scent tied to childhood memories Alexander rarely visited. You used to read here, Claire said quietly, surprising him. He turned sharply. How do you know that? She looked embarrassed. Your father talked about you sometimes. Not often. But when he did, it was always with pride. The words landed gently, like a hand settling on his shoulder. Pride. He had not known his father felt that way. Claire stepped closer to the bookshelf and reached out to touch a spine lightly. This was his favorite. He told me he read it with you every winter. Alexander followed her gaze and saw the worn navy cover of a storybook he had not touched in years. A storybook he had forgotten he remembered. He reached out and slid it from the shelf, the weight familiar in his hands. I did not think anyone else knew about this, he said. He did, Claire replied softly. He kept every memory close to him. Alexander turned toward her then, really seeing her, not as the maid who changed linens or polished silverware, but as someone deeply woven into his father's life, someone who had carried memories he did not even know existed. And standing there in the quiet study, surrounded by the remnants of a man they had both loved in different ways, he realized his understanding of Claire Dawson had only just begun. The late afternoon light stretched long across the study floor, turning the dust in the air into soft gold as Alexander held the old storybook in his hands. Claire watched him quietly, her posture gentle and patient, as if she knew he needed space to absorb the weight of everything he had just learned. He placed the book on the desk, tracing the worn edge with his thumb. I used to sit by that window with him, he said, his voice low. He always read the same chapter twice because I would fall asleep halfway through. Claire smiled faintly, a small expression filled with warmth instead of the polite neutrality she wore around the estate. He told me you liked the sound of his voice more than the story itself. The comment caught Alexander off guard. He turned toward her slowly. He told you that? Yes, she whispered. Your father talked about the little things. Things he thought you did not notice. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of tenderness and regret. For years he had believed his father's affection had been distant, filtered through business trips and long silences. But Claire spoke of memories he had never been allowed to see. Why did he never tell us about you? Alexander asked again, not accusing, simply searching. Claire lowered her gaze, fingers brushing the spine of another book. Because I think he wanted to protect me. And maybe, protect you too. Alexander waited, sensing there was more. Claire took a careful breath. My childhood was not easy. Things at home were sometimes unsafe. When your father found me behind the grocery store, I had been there for 2 days. The words were soft, unembellished, factual. She spoke as someone who had learned to survive by not reopening wounds. Alexander felt the urge to step closer, not out of pity but out of respect. He carried a warm blanket in his car, she continued. He wrapped it around me and told me I did not have to be afraid anymore. Then he brought me sandwiches every week and talked to me about school. He made me promise I would keep going, no matter what happened. She looked at the bookshelf again, her eyes distant with memory. He never asked for anything. He never treated me like I was fragile or broken. He just cared. Quietly. Alexander felt the room shift around him. The study suddenly felt smaller, as if holding too many unspoken truths. Claire, he said gently, you were a child. If he cared so much, why did he not bring you home? Her lips curved into a sad, knowing smile. Because he respected your family. He did not want to disrupt your lives. He believed some help should remain invisible if it meant keeping peace. And I understood that. A silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the moment with a slow rhythm. Alexander finally spoke. You were part of his life. I never knew. But you were. Claire looked startled, almost as if she had never expected to hear those words. I was only a small part, she said. A very small one. Small does not mean insignificant, he replied, his voice steady and sincere. She pressed a hand gently against the edge of the desk, grounding herself. I did not come to the estate expecting anything. I only applied for the job because it was honest work. I never thought you would learn about the past. Alexander studied her carefully. Maybe it is time I do. The warmth in her eyes flickered, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She looked as if she wanted to step back into the hallway and also as if she wanted to stay. The sunlight dimmed slightly as a cloud passed overhead, casting the room in a softer, more intimate shade. Alexander gestured to a nearby armchair. Sit, if you want. Tell me more. Claire hesitated, torn between habit and honesty, then walked toward the chair with slow, deliberate steps. As she sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap, Alexander realized this was the first time he had ever seen her choose presence over invisibility. And somehow, that simple act felt like the true beginning of everything that was still to come. The late afternoon light stretched long across the study floor, turning the dust in the air into soft gold as Alexander held the old storybook in his hands. Claire watched him quietly, her posture gentle and patient, as if she knew he needed space to absorb the weight of everything he had just learned. He placed the book on the desk, tracing the worn edge with his thumb. I used to sit by that window with him, he said, his voice low. He always read the same chapter twice because I would fall asleep halfway through. Claire smiled faintly, a small expression filled with warmth instead of the polite neutrality she wore around the estate. He told me you liked the sound of his voice more than the story itself. The comment caught Alexander off guard. He turned toward her slowly. He told you that? Yes, she whispered. Your father talked about the little things. Things he thought you did not notice. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of tenderness and regret. For years he had believed his father's affection had been distant, filtered through business trips and long silences. But Claire spoke of memories he had never been allowed to see. Why did he never tell us about you? Alexander asked again, not accusing, simply searching. Claire lowered her gaze, fingers brushing the spine of another book. Because I think he wanted to protect me. And maybe, protect you too. Alexander waited, sensing there was more. Claire took a careful breath. My childhood was not easy. Things at home were sometimes unsafe. When your father found me behind the grocery store, I had been there for 2 days. The words were soft, unembellished, factual. She spoke as someone who had learned to survive by not reopening wounds. Alexander felt the urge to step closer, not out of pity but out of respect. He carried a warm blanket in his car, she continued. He wrapped it around me and told me I did not have to be afraid anymore. Then he brought me sandwiches every week and talked to me about school. He made me promise I would keep going, no matter what happened. She looked at the bookshelf again, her eyes distant with memory. He never asked for anything. He never treated me like I was fragile or broken. He just cared. Quietly. Alexander felt the room shift around him. The study suddenly felt smaller, as if holding too many unspoken truths. "Claire," he said gently, "you were a child. If he cared so much, why did he not bring you home?" Her lips curved into a sad, knowing smile. "Because he respected your family. He did not want to disrupt your lives. He believed some help should remain invisible if it meant keeping peace. And I understood that." A silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the moment with a slow rhythm. Alexander finally spoke. "You were part of his life. I never knew. But you were." Claire looked startled, almost as if she had never expected to hear those words. "I was only a small part," she said. "A very small one." "Small does not mean insignificant," he replied, his voice steady and sincere. She pressed a hand gently against the edge of the desk, grounding herself. "I did not come to the estate expecting anything. I only applied for the job because it was honest work. I never thought you would learn about the past." Alexander studied her carefully. "Maybe it is time I do." The warmth in her eyes flickered, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She looked as if she wanted to step back into the hallway and also as if she wanted to stay. The sunlight dimmed slightly as a cloud passed overhead, casting the room in a softer, more intimate shade. Alexander gestured to a nearby armchair. "Sit, if you want. Tell me more." Claire hesitated, torn between habit and honesty, then walked toward the chair with slow, deliberate steps. As she sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap, Alexander realized this was the first time he had ever seen her choose presence over invisibility. And somehow, that simple act felt like the true beginning of everything that was still to come. The evening settled over Hayes estate with a calm, amber glow, the kind that softened the edges of the world and made every room feel quieter. Claire walked beside Alexander down the long hallway toward the memorial garden behind the house, her steps careful, almost hesitant, as if crossing into a chapter she had never meant to enter. The garden lights flickered on as they approached, small warm bulbs lining the stone pathway where the air carried the faint scent of rosemary and fresh earth. Alexander paused near the center, his hands resting loosely in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. "Claire," he said gently, "earlier today, when you asked if I wanted you to stop visiting my father's grave, I realized something. I never wanted distance between you and anything he cared about." She looked up, startled by the sincerity in his voice. "I did not want to overstep," she whispered. "My place here has always been simple." "Maybe it was," he replied softly, "but it does not have to stay that way." Her breath caught as he reached for a small wooden box resting on a stone bench. He opened it carefully, revealing an object she had not seen in more than a decade, the pocket watch his father always carried. Its silver surface shone even under the dim garden lights. Claire's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "Shepherd Hayes never went anywhere without that watch." Alexander nodded. "I remember that. I found it in his desk last night. I thought about how he used to let me wind it before he left for trips." He traced the engraving on the lid with his thumb. "But what I did not know until you told me, is that he also carried it the day he found you." Claire stepped closer without realizing it, her breath gentle in the cool air. "He told me it reminded him that time was precious. He said some people waste it on the wrong things, but others use it to help someone who needs a place to feel safe." Alexander looked up, his gaze softening. "Then it belongs with someone who understood what he meant." He extended the watch toward her. Claire froze, her hands trembling slightly. "Alexander, I cannot accept this. It is the last thing he left to you." "It is the thing he left for both of us," he said. The weight of his words settled between them, steady and warm. After a long moment, she reached out and cradled the watch carefully in her hands, as if it were something alive. Her eyes glimmered, not from sadness but from a fragile kind of gratitude. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Then do not say anything," he replied. Just know that I see you now. Not as someone in the background. Not as someone who owes us anything. But as the person my father chose to help, the person he believed in, and the person who kept honoring him long after everyone else forgot. Claire held the watch close, her fingers curling gently around the cool metal. For the first time since she arrived at the estate, she felt the quiet shift inside her. A sense of belonging she had never allowed herself to imagine. And as the garden lights glowed softly around them, Alexander realized that this moment, delicate and unguarded, was the closest he had ever felt to understanding his father's heart, and to understanding Claire Dawson. The following morning arrived with a gentle mist hanging over the grounds of Hayes Estate, the kind that softened every outline and made the world feel quieter than usual. Claire stepped out onto the stone terrace with the pocket watch held carefully in her hands, its silver surface catching the pale light of dawn. She had barely slept, not from worry, but from the weight of everything that had shifted between her and Alexander the night before. She ran her fingers across the engraving, feeling the grooves she used to trace only in her memory. For years she had carried the lessons Shepherd Hayes gave her, never expecting his son to one day hand her the very symbol of those lessons. She was staring at the watch when Alexander stepped onto the terrace behind her. His footsteps were soft, hesitant, as if he understood the fragile stillness around her. "You are up early," he said. Claire offered a tiny smile. It felt wrong to keep this in a drawer. I wanted to see it in the daylight. Alexander nodded. He would have liked that. The silence between them was warm, not awkward, but Claire sensed a heaviness in his posture, a tension he had not voiced yet. He leaned against the railing, the breeze tugging lightly at his shirt. "Claire," he said slowly, "there is something I need to ask. Not because I doubt you, but because I want to understand the truth completely." Her hand stilled. "What truth?" "When my father passed," he began carefully, "you did not come to the service." She swallowed, the memory tightening her shoulders. "I watched from across the road," she admitted. "I did not think I had the right to sit among people who knew him in ways I did not." Alexander turned toward her fully, his expression soft but earnest. "He knew you. Deeply. Maybe more honestly than he knew many people in that room." Her breath caught at the sincerity in his voice. The idea was unexpectedly comforting. "I just did not want to disturb the family," she whispered. "You were grieving. I was not part of that world." Alexander shook his head gently. "You were part of his world. I just did not see it until now." A shy flicker crossed her face, but before she could respond, another presence approached them from the terrace entrance. Mrs. Porter, the senior housekeeper, stood stiffly with a folder in her hand, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to interrupt. Her eyes flicked between them, her expression polite but tight. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I apologize, but I need to speak with you regarding the staff schedule." Alexander straightened, sensing something else beneath her tone. "Is it urgent?" "It is, relevant," she replied carefully. Her gaze landed briefly on the pocket watch in Claire's hand, and something unreadable passed through her eyes. Claire felt a sudden tension settle in her chest. She stepped back instinctively, as though preparing to fade into the background again. "I should return to the laundry room," she murmured. But Alexander reached out slightly, not touching her, just anchoring her with his voice. "Claire, please stay." Mrs. Porter cleared her throat softly. "Sir, there have been comments among the staff." "Questions?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "About what?" Mrs. Porter hesitated, then said quietly, "About Miss Dawson's relationship with your father." Claire's breath froze. Heat rushed into her cheeks, not from guilt but from the sting of being misjudged. Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Comments," he repeated. "Rumors," Mrs. Porter clarified. "Some believe she may have had motives. That her connection to Mr. Shepherd Hayes was not entirely innocent." The words landed like cold rain, sharp and unfair. Claire's fingers clenched around the pocket watch, her pulse quickening with hurt. Alexander inhaled slowly, his voice steady but laced with something fierce and protective. My father helped her. He never owed anyone an explanation for kindness. Claire lifted her chin, her voice quiet but steady. I never asked him for anything. Not once. I know, Alexander replied immediately. His certainty soothed something in her chest. Mrs. Porter looked uncomfortable now, as if realizing she had stepped into something deeper than she understood. I only thought you should be aware, sir. Staff gossip tends to grow. Alexander nodded once, firm and final. Thank you. I will address it. She bowed her head slightly and left them alone again on the terrace. The silence that followed held a new weight. Not distance. Not doubt. Something protective. Something unspoken. Claire finally exhaled. I never wanted to cause trouble here. Alexander stepped closer, his voice gentle but unwavering. You did not cause anything. People talk when they do not understand goodness. But I do understand. She looked up, startled by the certainty in his tone. And I will not let anyone rewrite the truth about you. Or about him. His words settled into her like warmth after a long winter, and for the first time, she felt the ground beneath her feet begin to feel safe. The rest of the morning unfolded slowly, as if the estate itself sensed the tension that had settled over its halls. Claire moved through the linen room with deliberate care, folding crisp white sheets and placing them into neat stacks, but her mind was still on the terrace, on Mrs. Porter's pointed remarks, on the sting of being misunderstood after years of quiet service. She paused, fingers pressed lightly against the fabric, when she sensed someone approach. Alexander stood in the doorway, his expression calm but firm, the kind of calm that came only when a decision had already been made. Claire, he said softly, come with me. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the old instinct to avoid drawing attention. Still, something in his voice reached past that instinct, and she followed him through the hallway. He led her to the small memorial garden behind the estate, the same place where he had given her the pocket watch. The early afternoon sun warmed the stone pathway, and the rosemary bushes swayed gently in the breeze. Claire looked around, puzzled. Why here? Alexander took a slow breath, as if organizing his thoughts before they took shape. I wanted to talk to you away from the others. Away from gossip. Her chest tightened at the word, but his tone held no judgment, only reassurance. What Mrs. Porter said earlier, he continued, I need you to know I do not believe any of it. Not for a moment. Claire lowered her gaze. I know people talk. It is natural. I just never wanted to be the cause of tension in your home. You are not, he said simply. But that does not mean I will ignore the situation. She looked up in surprise. What do you mean? He stepped closer, not crowding her, just enough for his sincerity to feel undeniably real. I spoke with the staff this afternoon. I told them the truth. That my father helped you because you were a child who deserved safety and kindness. That your connection to him was built on gratitude and nothing else. And that I will not tolerate anyone twisting it into something untrue. Claire's lips parted slightly. The thought of him defending her so openly stirred something deep and warm inside her. You did not have to do that, she whispered. Yes, he said gently, I did. A slow, unsure breath moved through her as she held his gaze. People may still wonder, she said. Rumors do not disappear easily. Then let them wonder about my opinion, Alexander replied. Not yours. The breeze curled between them, carrying the scent of flowers just beginning to bloom. Claire closed her fingers around the pocket watch in her hand, the metal warm from the sun. I spent so many years trying not to be seen, she murmured. Trying to do the right thing quietly. I did not expect anyone to stand up for me. You did the right thing for so long, Alexander said softly. Now it is my turn. Her breath steadied, and for the first time she felt the whispers of the estate fade into the background, replaced by something steadier and more honest than she had ever expected to receive. The garden around them seemed to glow brighter as if acknowledging a truth finally spoken aloud, a truth that neither of them could ignore anymore. The afternoon sun dipped gently behind the tall hedges of the memorial garden, casting long shadows across the stone pathway as Claire stood quietly, the pocket watch resting safely in her hands. Alexander watched her for a moment, taking in the way the sunlight softened her features, how calm she looked despite everything that had unfolded in the last 24 hours. Something about the stillness of the garden made the moment feel suspended, as if the world had stepped back to give them room to breathe. Claire exhaled softly, her voice barely louder than the rustle of the leaves. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I only wanted to thank him in the only way I knew how." "You honored him," Alexander said. "You kept his memory alive in a way none of us did. That matters." She looked down, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But now the entire estate is watching. I do not want your name caught up in whispers because of a past that was never yours to carry." He stepped closer, slow and steady, until the space between them held a quiet warmth. "I am not worried about my name." His tone held an honesty that made Claire's breath tremble. When she finally met his eyes, she saw something there she had not allowed herself to imagine, something soft, intentional, and undeniably real. "Claire," he continued, "I spent years trying to understand who my father was. Trying to figure out the parts of him I never saw. But you held a piece of him I never knew existed. And I want to keep learning about that. About you." Her eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with a gentle, hesitant hope. "I am only a maid," she whispered. "You are not only anything," Alexander replied. "You were important to him. And you are becoming important to me." The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine from the far end of the garden. Claire pressed her fingers lightly against the pocket watch, grounding herself in the familiar weight. "I do not want to step into a place I do not belong," she said. "You belong exactly where you are," Alexander said, his voice warm and sure. "The only question is whether you will let yourself believe that." For a moment, she could not speak. Years of hiding in the corners of rooms, years of keeping her head down, years of learning to be unseen, those habits did not disappear easily. But standing there, with the man she had quietly admired from a distance, the man who was beginning to understand her with a depth she had never expected, something inside her shifted. "I do not know how to move forward," she admitted softly. "Then let me show you," he said. He extended his hand toward her, palm open, steady, offering not pressure but invitation. Claire's gaze fell to his hand, then rose slowly to his face. His expression held no urgency, no expectation, only sincerity. Carefully, almost reverently, she placed her hand in his. Their fingers folded together naturally, as though the gesture had waited years to happen. The connection was gentle but certain, grounding both of them in a moment that neither wanted to end. Alexander gave her hand the smallest reassuring squeeze. "We will do this slowly," he said. "Together." Claire felt the warmth in her chest spread, soft and bright. "Together," she echoed. As the light around them softened into early evening gold, the Hayes Memorial Garden, once a place of quiet remembrance, became the beginning of something new, something tender, something neither of them had planned but both of them were ready to embrace. And for the first time since Shepherd Hayes had passed, his legacy did not feel like a shadow. It felt like a blessing.